Hello everyone and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I have got part 2 of my discussion with George Stacey-Stevens of the Cirencester Physiotherapy Centre. This is only really going to make sense if you listen to part 1. So if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, make sure you do, okay? Go to the previous episode in this series and from there listen to the episode where we really kind of lay the foundations to help you understand the principles behind what it is that we discuss in this second episode. Where the first episode is much more about the theory, this second episode is much more about the practical application and the actual nuts and bolts of rehab. Now, I will be doing a sort of a conclusion in plain English at the end for those who struggle with the language a little bit, but until then, let's jump straight in. So we talked a lot about what physio is and how a physio can help you recover from an injury. But how is it that, what causes injuries in the first place? You know, what is it? What
Yeah,
broadly happens inside the body when somebody picks up? If we stick to overuse injuries, so injuries that happen because of an overloading of a tendon or a
yep,
stress fracture,
yep,
or anything like that, as opposed to I fell off of my bike, because I think we
yeah,
both know what happened there.
yeah,
What is
yeah.
it that? How is it that these overuse injuries are caused?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because I'd actually define it slightly different to overuse
Hmm.
injuries because it is, as I say, the idea if you look at top trade, like look at Tadej Pogacar,
Yeah.
he's happily doing 5 hours of zone two, cruising around sort of thing. So what I often define it as is change in use or alteration in use
Hmm.
injuries. The idea being is we've kind of defined it already, but this idea of conditioning, this level of preemptive level of exposure this individual has. And what happens if you suddenly alter or increase, interestingly, or decrease the volume of training that you can actually have tendinopathies caused because of a sudden reduction in training volume as well,
Interesting.
which is quite interesting. So I say I also often, certainly if I kind of follow into tendons specifically, because it's
Yeah.
a very common injury thread, is that if we I describe them like our most boring friend, they don't like change. I like consistently, like exposure, like doing things repeatedly.
Yeah.
Which again, if you're using that tendon a lot normally, say you're like right up through to your ultra marathon runners, if they're used to that, actually they will be unhappier not doing things
Yeah.
than they are doing that ultra marathon training. And it's that process of the change in utilization is the kind of key things I really talk to people about. So as you say, that individual coming off the desk, suddenly altering and starting their training exposure, that is, and that change in utilization, that level of load change is the thing that actually alters the regulation of tendon structure. And I'll quickly buzz through a kind of tendinopathy
Mm.
as a pathology because it is quite interesting and to work around it. So what the body actually does is, because it's trying to, as you say, if you change your activity, your body is then trying to keep up with that adaptation. It's going, right, we were having to do this, I now have to put down more cross-sectional area, more tendon for kind of strength, springiness, stiffness. So I'm going to have to put more collagen in that area. It's gone, bugger, I need to keep up with this change. The
Yeah.
body then lays down new collagen, what we call it type 3 collagen. And that is quite immature. The analogy I use is like the kind of soft skin under a callus.
Hmm.
Quite slightly immature, not quite as strong, not quite as adaptable. If you then continue to train hard and expose and kind of keep that intensity again, if you're not following a training plan or something
Mm.
that's too intense for you, that essentially breaks that new kind of fresh collagen that's trying to adapt into scar tissue.
And collagen is what tendons are made up of, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there is, it's the same as skin, collagen, that kind of collagen in one of the main building blocks of tendon.
Hmm.
Tendon biology is much more than just collagen, but we'll use that
Yeah.
analogy for
Yeah.
the moment before careening into the biology of tendon development. The But as I say, it's a simple element of things. Type of collagen, new stuff that gets laid down. That's kind of the building blocks. The kind of, if you think about nails on your fingers, you've got the kind of striations, the linear striations
Yeah.
to your nails.
Yeah.
That's almost how you have to think of a tendon. They have these. It's almost like a piece of elastic, loads of linear striations, and the body lays down new layers and strands to create this lovely, almost like climbing rope
Mm.
style, kind of really strong linear structure. What happens with tendons is, you say you have this area that's kind of developing really quickly, new stuff being laid down, and that new stuff adapts into scar tissue rather than that lovely linear stuff. So it's
Okay.
haphazard, cross-sectionally, not particularly linear, kind of what we kind of analyze as technically it isn't scar tissue, and I won't go any deeper than that. We'll talk about that another time.
Yeah.
Technically, it's a different type of collagen deposition. Um, and that type of collagen, let's say 95% of your tendon is perfect, still linear, still strong, still adaptable, but you have this kind of 5% deposition that causes this pain and alteration and variation. Which is why, as I say, why it's so important to continue strength training, and what you brushed on earlier, this kind of rule of three that you have, is
Mm.
that why we say, when we've discussed this together previously, is the idea is not necessarily removing training, because again,
Mm.
removing training is a change. Again, tendons don't like change. So this idea of we want to adapt your training program, which is why it's even more important to work with a coach to go, right, we can't do this at the moment. Okay, well, let's drop this, add this, vary this, and let's try, I don't know, let's say it's let's say, I don't know, running, that's the specific thing, it's in
Mm.
your Achilles. You go, okay, right, we need to deload the volume of running for a period of time,
Yep.
and then maybe put in something that's a little bit more low load on the Achilles. Let's say if we went on to cross training or onto one of the kind of cyclic kind of
Yep.
treadmills, if someone's got access to one of the kind
Mm.
of self-propelled treadmills that have curve, because that then dramatically reduces Achilles load and puts more load. It still gives you the running based training
Mm.
exposure for the hips and
Yep.
the glutes and everything, so that stays consistent like the tendons like it, but it just takes a bit of time off the Achilles to allow that to recover. And then through physio and strength training, we can remove that scar tissue, principally by strength training and adapting that scar tissue, bit of hands-on work, bit of strength training,
Yep.
back into that linear, strong tendon tissue to
Mm.
stop the symptom production that you get post an injury.
Yes.
And that is, say, a relatively simple way of putting it, but even if people have a bit more question on that side of things, because I'm very happy to dig into the biology of those sorts of things, but I'd spend 3 hours doing it, so it's probably not for
Yeah, I
me.
think yeah, we'll save the listeners that. Um, but it's as somebody increases their training load, that is more tension that's being put on the tendon,
Yeah,
due
it's that
to it's sort of,
change.
sorry.
And as you say, that change you're describing, then
Yeah,
that increase is the big thing.
yeah,
It puts, say,
yeah,
tension load on the tendon.
yeah. And that's because the muscle, is that the muscle itself getting tighter, stronger? Is it just more?
So yeah, so it's not such a, that's interesting. So muscle tightness actually is often a reaction from them. So as I say, the human body is a very well set up piece of kit that's designed to protect itself.
Mm,
So it is, the change itself comes because of the alteration in load. It's that
mm.
kind of, in the same way as if you, I don't know, let's say use that callus analogy again. If you
Yep,
rubbed your hand on a piece of sandpaper and you did it about the right level, if you did it kind of 5 minutes every day, you'd strengthen your hands. It would literally make
yep,
your hands rougher, stronger, more resilient to that sandpaper. If you just rubbed your hand against sandpaper for 24 hours, you'd rub it down to the bone. It's that idea. Obviously, that's a very extreme kind of area of adaptation, but because the body can adapt, but it does take time. It is a tricky one to do. It's that process of it's which is at the whole point of training programs and conditioning. Interesting. What happens then is that this reaction, so because the brain goes, oh, there's this alteration of collagen, I can't keep up with the rate of adaptation that
yep.
we're placing in. The body goes, there's what's called a Golgi tendon organ, which is
Hmm.
essentially a strain receptor for your tendon. That strain receptor monitors in your brain, oh, there's an injury to this tendon. So what I'm going to do is increase what we call the physiological tone of the muscle, which is what we describe as a tight muscle. And that's actually the brain impacting that physical tightness to make something feel restricted and tight to prevent you training on it.
Yep.
So it is a protective reaction in the same way that if you put your hand on a hot stove, your hand automatically pulls your hand
Yep.
away from it. It's not something you've thought about. It's a inbuilt protective physiological reaction the body can place in to protect that area. So that muscle tone is a reaction the brain is putting in place to essentially help you prevent it kind of further injury.
Yep.
Primitively,
Yep.
certainly, it's the kind of very caveman-y,
Yes.
ugh,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
make
Yep.
pain, I kind of stop sort of thing. But that the muscular tone itself, and this again, this is for tendon injuries specifically. If we're looking at muscular injuries, it would be different again.
Hmm.
Um, it's that would then that would be much more the element of how do we adapt the muscle collagen and development in a
Mm.
muscle, which because it's got more blood flow is quicker. Again, different timelines, different rehab types.
Yep.
But principally, that tone, if it was a muscular injury, would be due to the swelling within the muscle post the muscular injury.
Yep.
So it's that kind of element of is it a reaction or central causation, which again would come on diagnosis depending on what type of injury that athlete has.
So in a
But
nutshell,
that's their kind of
yeah.
yeah,
So in a nutshell, most injuries, I think we can, obviously we're not going to get into them today, but we can include, most kinds of tendinopathies, muscle injuries, stress fractures and the like,
yeah,
as being that the body has, you're just asking the body to adapt to too much
too
training, too
quickly,
much stress in too short a period of
literally,
time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That is the core element. It's the easiest way I'd say it in a quick nutshell.
Yeah.
It is the imbalance between training and recovery.
There we go. That's a much better way of putting it. Um, So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of listeners listening to this thinking about times that they've been injured will probably be kind of nodding along thinking, right, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. Thinking about the time that they had a flare up because, at a time that just after they did, they decided to go off plan that they push out their long run for 20 minutes longer because they wanted to
Yeah,
round up to a half marathon or something. And that will kind of cause that bit of a flare up. And the stronger that somebody is, the more
yeah,
strength training they've been doing, the more years they've been training, the more
yeah,
sort of tolerance their body has to those kinds of increases. Because
literally.
there are going to be times where
Yeah,
we do have to, like, if somebody goes off to a training camp, for instance,
yeah,
we are going to
yeah,
be
yeah.
asking a lot
Yeah,
of them for a week. They're going to be going out, they're probably going to
yeah,
be swimming every day, riding their bike most days. There's going to be some runs in there as well. But
yeah,
following that training camp, you then have that deload week afterwards.
absolutely,
Whereas if
absolutely.
somebody came off of a training camp and go, I felt really fit, I feel really strong, and I'm going to try and maintain this high volume
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I've managed to condition my body to, that's probably going to be an injury waiting to happen in most cases.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a perfect example. And as I say, certainly, and what I also talk about is say training camps and things like that considered is that I'd said about the idea of recovery, and obviously, probably the biggest thing around recovery is sleep.
Mm,
So everyone talks about kind of the ability in a training plan being able to go right. Okay, if I'm on camp, I'm not having to deal with be it the kids, be it this, be it that. I can
yeah.
go and wholeheartedly, and it's a really again a rough brief statistic is that athletes top level this is done within Olympic level athletes a very high level as well. So not even just people starting,
Mm.
is that individuals that sleep for 8 hours are around a bit. Well, I'll go the other way around. Individuals that sleep for less than 8 hours are 1.7 times more likely to be injured immediately the day after than individuals that sleep 8 hours.
Wow.
So if you do one, if you and this essentially they compared a 6 hour sleep volume for one day, an 8 hour. If you train intensely on 6 hours of sleep, you are 1.7 times more likely to get injured.
That's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. I wasn't
That is,
aware. I mean, you've thrown quite a
yeah,
few mind-boggling numbers at me this morning already.
yeah,
But
there's some.
that is wow, that is
Yeah,
huge. And of
huge.
course, I can hear, I can already hear the pushback from some athletes being, well, I don't have 8 hours to sleep, you
Yeah,
know. But
yeah,
the what I would say, obviously, I know that some people work shift work, have young children. Sometimes it is completely
yeah.
out of people's
Really
hands.
hard.
But
Yeah,
in certain
really hard.
situations, you have to ask yourself if you're looking at your plan or you have a training app that is setting you sessions, if
Yeah,
you are unable to get more than 5 or 6 hours sleep a night, you
yeah,
probably need to look at this plan and go, is this actually suitable for me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you are unable, because sort of a training plan is written for a fictional individual, right? It's
Yep.
written for somebody who has an equal level of ability in swimming, cycling, and running.
Yeah.
Um, and that person doesn't exist. And we also assume that that person gets enough sleep, they have enough protein, enough calories to be able
Me.
to support their training.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you are missing that vital element of sleep, it may be that you need to cut back on that volume in that week. Just because the
Yep.
training plan says that you need to do a double day on Wednesday, if you
Yep.
are really struggling, if you cannot get the recovery in that the plan kind of expects or hopes you will, you need
Yep.
to make adaptations to that. You cannot simply follow
Absolutely.
it blindly and then act surprised if you end up picking up a niggle.
Absolutely. And this is, as you say, why again, it's why it's another such so important to be able to, and I say I talk about in my practice a lot, is
Mm.
the knowledge and understanding of those practices. And again, it's why it's so important to work with a coach that you can go, actually, I've just traveled back from this work thing. I've only had 4 hours sleep and I've got a
Yeah.
double day. What can we change this around for this
Yes.
week because I've got X, Y, and Z? Because and this is the big thing, is as you say, a lot of people, especially to get in those really high intensities, you say, won't be able to have the 8 hours. But in those elements, we go, right, okay, well, don't have those weeks as the progressive adaptive weeks.
Yes. Yeah.
You get, and it's that same element of okay, your tendons are very good at running on, the body's very, very, very good at running on less than 8 hours sleep if necessary, but
Yeah.
don't make those weeks the ones where you're trying to create loads of adaptation.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of, because, and the interesting thing is it also won't work if you're trying to do that really, really strong
Yeah.
adaptive week and you're not sleeping. Guess what? It's not going to adapt.
The adaptation won't occur. The training breaks you
No,
down, but it's the sleep, it's
yeah,
the adaptation, it's the nutrition that
exactly,
actually make you
exactly.
fitter and stronger. Which again, because there can
Yeah,
be a bit of like this sort of like bravado that comes with endurance
yeah,
training of getting who can get in the most
yeah,
hours, who can, put in the most
yeah,
intensity, the most interval
yeah,
sessions, double threshold days. But if, you're not actually really going to be getting fitter if you're not
exactly,
giving the body what it needs to recover. And looking at the
exactly.
training schedule of an elite athlete is going to
Yeah,
give
very
you, like,
different.
you cannot afford to look at that and use that as inspiration
No,
for your own training.
absolutely
It
not.
has to be, it has to be different to you. So
Yeah, it's individual.
it is. So what are the most common injuries that you see from triathletes that attend your practice?
Yeah, so most common ones, if I was, let's say if I break it down per sport,
Mm,
running in kind of breaking down into kind of triathletes that run, Achilles and glute medius, definitely tendinopathies in that environment. You get
yeah,
the odd stress fracture in the foot, but generally that is in the very, very highly like the very high distance
like
individuals that
huge
from
volumes of run training. Yeah.
exactly, which in itself is more the marathon runners more than the triathletes. Really, it's rare. It's much rarer to see the triathletes coming with stress fractures,
Yeah.
but it's much more the tendon pathology.
And
So
those would
kind of
be
side,
stress fractures primarily in the metatarsals, which are the bones that run alongside
yeah,
the feet.
yeah, cuneiforms or metatarsals, usually sort of
Hmm.
thing. The 2 points, just because they're interesting. There's slightly lower perfusion bones in the foot, so it's the reason why we often get stress fractures there. It's just they have slightly lower blood flow to them, so their
Yeah.
adaptive processes are a bit slower.
Hmm.
Um, and you get quite a lot of torque through the midfoot in that position.
Yeah.
As I say, the benefits for triathletes because of the ability to cross train and there's much less direct
Mm.
volume. Yeah, there's much less common. It's definitely something we still have to be aware of,
Hmm.
but it's for triathletes, it's certainly less common because you get that extra recovery period of time while you're cross
Yes.
training on the other
Yeah.
disciplines, which is nice. But as I say, gluteal tendinopathies and Achilles tendinopathies. The
Yeah.
reason being, they are the two. Well, I'll be a bit more specific. The soleus and the glute medius minimus are the only tendons in the body that exponentially increase in load as you run faster.
Okay. Yep.
So the idea being is like, let's say if you're doing a zone two aspect of things and your quad, as you run faster, quad tendons, your patellar tendon generally gets about the same, like it'll go
Mm.
linearly. It'll get a bit more load as you go a little bit faster.
Yeah.
the interesting thing is that the glute, and because they're both shock absorbers, essentially that's the key difference. They're the main ones.
Yes.
They do a lot of the shock absorption.
Yeah.
Obviously, the faster you run, if you think about looking at Usain Bolt sprinting, there's huge volumes of ground
Oh,
support and
yeah.
massively explosive,
Yes. Yeah.
massive. Whereas if you're doing a zone two training, kind of padding in between the athlete, going flat out, the ground contact force is exponentially higher. So it's the
Yes.
reason why we see more injuries between those two things. But again, that's where the strength training really comes
Hmm.
really handy. Cyclists, generally speaking, is lower back, neck, especially for Ironman. There's like the amount of neck injuries I can see from people trying to hold the aero position for the first time,
Yeah.
which is that they're probably the most common two there. And then not necessarily injury based, but a lot of people, especially getting into the time trial position, if they're using a TT bike, is hip mobility. So not
Yeah.
necessarily, it's kind of less of an injury, more of an issue, let's say, something that is that's come on that's preemptively there.
Yeah.
Get a lot of hip mobility issues that you have to then work through.
And how
Swimming with
how would that
shoulders
how would those issues present themselves to an athlete on a TT bike?
is an interesting one. Differently depending on how they're setting up the bike, but most of the time it's anterior groin pain. So if you're limiting in position, you'll feel like as you get down into the kind of onto the drops, onto the bars, close your hip angles down, you get one of two things happening. People either splaying their knees out at 45 degrees to try and open the hip angle, which
Yeah.
probably isn't the most aero position in the world. Or as you say, people trying to kind of sit up higher or curl their back over, which
Hmm.
then gives them more hip angle, but increases the stress on the lower back. So
Gotcha.
it's that kind of element of it's that's often, and that often is where the lower back and the neck symptoms come from, because you get, as you said, about this screening aspect of if you're getting to the point where someone's got a back injury, go, oh, okay, I'll just check your hips quickly, because I bet you if you're spending 3 or 4 hours in a TT position, it's going to put extra irritation and load on that back, which again, not necessarily a bad thing if your body's conditioning to it, as I
Mm.
said about what we were saying earlier. But if you're suddenly increasing the load and building those positions that are really irritable, and you haven't done it before, because not many people spend that many hours, especially in the winter, on
Yeah.
static bikes, which the benefit is riding outside. If you're standing and climbing, you've got a bit of time in and out of those
You
positions
do?
at
Yeah.
least. Suddenly doing it in those is cross training, and especially for those really well conditioned athletes, suddenly going, oh, I've gone on to indoor training and I'm suddenly getting more injuries. You go, well, it's often those sorts of variables that we start looking at.
Just been locked into that TT
And
position for a prolonged period. I guess it's
exactly.
the importance of getting good bike fit as well. You know,
Mm,
going to someone. I
absolutely.
know some physios do bike fits. I know some
Yeah.
bike fitters are generally sort of trained in that kind of musculoskeletal world. But sort of
Yeah.
paying, going getting a bike fit, and you should be looking at about like 2 to 3 hours if you want like a proper fit.
Yeah.
Someone who's going
Proper
to
one.
get you on the bed, who's going to be assessing your hip mobility, who's going to be assessing your levels of strength, who's going to be doing the pressure mapping on the saddle and really
Yeah.
working to get
That's
you
a good one.
into the most efficient position you can be on the bike so that you can put in those miles without picking up lower back pain. Because you know as well as I do, if
Yeah.
somebody ends up with lower back pain because of being in the TT position, that's going to follow them through the rest of their training, but also their day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Very hard to counter, certainly. So again, once again, prevention is much easier than cure in that environment.
And what about swimming?
It's probably a relatively logical one is shoulders. It is. Everyone's got the stereotype of rotator cuff pathologies and all that
Yeah.
side of things. That again, this is the interesting thing, and this is actually one of the things I struggled with the most within my training. Is that coming from a rowing background more than anything else, and
Mm.
never really being much of a swimmer, certainly in the discipline environment, is that rowing you build huge volumes of torque and strength with the shoulder below kind of shoulder height. So all kind of
Hmm.
pull in kind of lower rows. So
Yep.
my shoulder mobility was woeful,
Yep.
woeful. And the control and ability of those cuffs in that upper edge. Luckily, I've one of my partner's cousin is an ex GB swimmer, so he's kind of
Very
worked
good.
in, helped me train for that side of things, and talked about conditioning work that his coaches used to give him.
Hmm.
And digging into it, there is this kind of bi element of things of, if you injuries generally come when those, again, this alteration in volume of load. If you get to the point where you're suddenly trying to go, I'm going to really try and create that catch position, that kind of abnormal kind of
Mm.
position overhead, that rotation, and that ability for, even on the recovery, if you haven't got, let's say, thoracic mobility, swimming without a shadow of a doubt is probably the part where I'd say pre-emptive mobility environments is probably the most important. Is
Hmm.
you look at it and go, right, okay, if an individual doesn't have thoracic mobility, how that impacts the ability for the arm to recover. You go,
That's
if you
mobility in
think,
their
if you get,
spine, in their mid spine.
yeah, spinal mobility, and especially
Yeah.
in the mid back, if you like, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because if mid back can rotate more, that rotation allows more space for the arm to work.
Yeah.
If they haven't got rotation, it means the back of their shoulder has to work 10 times harder. Often they have to do a straight arm recovery rather than a nice kind of relaxed bent arm recovery, for example.
Hmm.
Straight arm increases the load on the arm significantly. Again, that change of
Okay.
load, especially as technique breaks down in this, and we talk
Yeah.
about this globally through sport, is what we talk to, and that's much higher with swimming than it is probably the other sports, is that technique breakdown. Is that if you don't have this free flowing mobility, where so much demand in swimming on the recovery is placed on the very small, intricate muscles that are hard to condition. If
Mm.
you don't have the mobility, it's very, very difficult to condition them for that full distance environment. So balancing, and principally the idea of almost spreading the load, is probably a good way of thinking about it.
Mm.
Spread the load. It works really. You can then spread it between different areas, minimizing the likelihood of focal injury.
Yeah. No, makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, on the run, hips, Achilles tendons, those sort of lower limb
Yeah,
injuries being the biggest ones. On
yeah,
the bike, it tends to be neck
absolutely.
and lower back, which again,
Yeah,
sometimes due to a lack of mobility, but there's also an
yeah,
element of poor bike positioning. People
yeah,
sort of setting up their aero bars themselves, or even going and getting like a proper fit, and then deciding to put in like a 3 hour ride on the bars the next day.
yeah,
That's
yeah, exactly.
again, the body doesn't, it likes consistency, it likes things to stay the same.
Yeah,
And if you do get a fit, especially if they go around and they sort of drop, raise your saddle up by half an inch and bring your
mm,
bars
yeah,
further towards you, and they're changing a lot in that position, you do need to allow that body to adjust to that.
yeah,
With the
yeah,
swimming,
absolutely.
then it's largely shoulder mobility,
Order. Yeah,
rotator cuff issues. Do you find
yeah,
that so if you have people who come from, say, sort of a gym background, people who do a
yeah,
lot of like shoulder work, overhead press, that kind
yeah,
of thing. Obviously, that's
yeah,
great from, that stability of that joint
yeah.
when they
Okay.
are, when they're setting themselves up for that catch. But do you find that there
Yeah.
is an increased risk of issues with impingements and the like if somebody has come from that world?
It's an interesting one. So not so much impingements, which is good. It is, the trickiness is often the very nature of the rotation. Is
Mm.
that because I definitely came under what you're describing there is exactly what I came under. It was
Yeah.
periods of strength training, lack of mobility, and a lot of lack of shoulder blade mobility as well.
Mm.
Is that it's just very hard to actually hit that kind of, what the word I'd use, an internally rotated position, but
Mhm.
that kind of arm above the head, and then allowing the arm to rotate into the catch position
Mhm.
before pulling.
Yeah.
That is where I see, especially those gym elements, because a straight overhead press, fine, yeah, they're good at getting the hand up into the glide position.
Yeah.
But as soon as they go, probably the best way, the only way they can do is a straight arm pull, because that you don't have that real that, and this is kind of the difference, is that brilliant from a strength training, good, lovely, but that, again, the nichety of the rotation and the rotator cuff for swimming, because there's
Yeah.
so much rotation at the shoulder.
Yeah.
That's where those people, because yes, they're conditioned in one area, but they don't have any condition in the rotation.
Yeah.
So that's where you often see injuries come up in those areas. Is that because they're very interesting? It's almost the imbalance in the levels of strength, if you like. If
Mm.
they go, oh, I
Yes.
can power, their leg power is huge, like the drive that they have is
Yes.
massive,
Yeah.
but they then get to the point where they go, I'm burnt out in like 200 meters. Why can't I
Yeah.
swim more than 200 meters? And you go, well, it's because the intricacy, the little bits, haven't had any of that condition that you've been doing in the gym
Yes.
for that
Yeah.
period of time.
And
So
thinking ahead, what you're saying about athletes who they have to have that straight arm pull as
yeah,
they due to that level of mobility. That means that they're placing a much greater load on the deltoids, on the
yeah,
bigger muscles in their
absolutely.
shoulders, less recruitment of the lats and the triceps from that position, which is not only going to increase the risk of injury due to overloading the shoulder, which is at the end of the day a relatively fragile muscle group, but
Yeah,
you've got much, much, much less muscle fibers to recruit. If you look at
yeah,
the amount of
less
force
power.
you can generate with your lats and with your triceps relative to just
Huge.
your shoulders, it's
Yeah,
it's night and day.
yeah. And that's the benefit is, as we said earlier, about the idea of if you the kind of benefit from a 700-pound wetsuit in terms of versus technique improvements in swimming. It is a no-brainer in terms of
Yeah.
the level of benefit. So as you say, and this is the hard bit when often people go and work with coaches, and the coach will say, "Oh, you need to have more catch position," and you go, "My shoulders don't have the facility for that."
Yeah.
Like initially, I was like, I work with say top level swimmer in my partner's cousin, and he said, "You just need to do this," and you go, "My shoulders don't do that
Yeah.
movement." Like, I could do that for maybe 50 meters and they're blown. And
Yeah.
it's that idea of going, that's where the mobility work really, really, really comes in important. Is
Yeah.
just the ability to sit there and have that routine of going, right, how long can, like a simple thing like how long can you land in front and lift your arms out to the side?
Yes.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
simple thing like that. And I bet you most people can't do more than about 30 seconds. You go, well, when you're swimming, you're going into that position essentially every stroke.
Yeah.
So if you've got 30 seconds of ability to do that, how long do you think you can swim for?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely right. So once somebody comes to you, they get a
Yep.
diagnosis. What does the rehab journey look like?
Yeah. Normally, so it's a two-phase thing. Uh, First, let's say 2 to 3 weeks, I work more intensely with patients. So because as you probably tell, I can talk quite a lot. The element of education is a big part of how I treat is
Yeah.
so week one, session one, assessment and treatment. We get you to the point where you know exactly what's going on. As I've kind of briefly we've talked about here, I get people understand the physiology behind their injury because I find that's a very big part of the
Yeah.
motivation,
Yeah.
and it informs the logic and the strategy for how we then fix that injury,
Hmm.
um, which also provides more motivation, which is nice. From there, we go, cool, brilliant. Take that point, that injury, that knowledge you built in the first session. I normally see people probably twice a week for the first couple of weeks to one reiterate that because I know I chat a lot and most of that injury, most of the information is going to go. Spoke to 700 words to me. I've taken up three.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I reiterate those ideas of what's going on physiologically. And then second session, we generally then develop, as I say, because we've done some hands-on treatment and initial stuff in the first session to make that injury feel better. We then really hunker down into the exercise and the strengthening
Yeah.
necessary. I talk to the individual. If there's someone that can or has access to a gym, immediately we go down the gym-based environment. That is really how I prefer and what is more effective. If they don't, there's hundreds of ways of working around those sorts of things.
Hmm.
Um, the gym is always best. It really is. It's one of those things because of the objectivity and the standardization, it is better. But there is some very niche ways and some good ways that we can work around build, let's say, for Achilles strengthening, if you can get to the point where you can find different ways of creating that load at home,
Yeah.
be that backpacks, improvisation, etc.
Yeah.
That's kind of week two. We're going to session two, session three, really building their knowledge in that environment. Then from there, usually I'm then starting to see really, we're expected to see improvement in, certainly in a tendon injury, for example, probably by They about 2 weeks down the line.
Hmm.
So at week two, we go. People should be coming in and going, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'm feeling better. I'm seeing adaptation. I can start to feel like that things like going up the stairs is no longer painful." Then we start adapting, and then essentially that kind of second to third week is really hunkering down on the idea of, and it's probably something you work on yourself, is progressive overload.
Yeah.
Is the idea of such a key term, such a big part of physio and training and everything in our world, is that I really start digging into, right, this is how you progressively overload. I'll give that exercise that I've given for whatever body part it is.
Hmm.
I want you to progress at this sort of rate. But then I will hunker down into the theory of, okay, so what is progressive overload? Why are we doing it? What's the importance in this injury? What's the process? So you always have these three distinct weeks of
Hmm.
week one being diagnosis, what's happening to me. Week two is starting building the ability to build and understand into the exercise. And then once you go into week three, where I'm expecting you to start going back to training, going, well, how do I continue progressing this strength training? So it's not only going to affect it now, but also continue to improve it in the future. And actually, as I say, quite often that same exercise, heel raises, etc., is the same exact exercise I do for performance anyway. So
Yes.
why we can, that kind of idea and theory of why we continue to go through these processes, as it were, sort of thing. But that is kind of three distinct phases. And during that entire time, I'm doing hands-on work, massage work, and kind of the ability, the kind of work to try and reduce that pain so that you can train at that intensity.
Yeah.
Because again, if I'm prescribing exercises that are just painful, and you go, "Oh, this is horrible," but that's not going to
Yes.
be creating adaptation either.
No.
So we get to the point where I'm catering and getting this specific to go, right, we're using hands-on works to mitigate the pain so that we can train and create the adaptation that we can with the exercise to then actually get you back to training that bit quicker.
Yeah. And that's what the shared goal should be, isn't it? Getting
Yeah,
people back training, doing what it is that they want to be doing, and but confidently.
yeah,
Once and to finish that rehab journey. But one mistake I hear sort of some athletes say they pick up an injury and they go to a physio and they get this rehab program, and then 3 4 weeks later they're back running, and then 6 weeks later they're back in the physio's office.
yeah.
And they go, oh, it happened
Really?
again. And the physio goes, well, did you keep up the rehab exercises that you were doing? Uh,
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
And
yeah.
unfortunately, if your body is predisposed, whether it's due to just how your body works or the training you're doing, if your body is predisposed to picking up an injury in a certain area, just because you finish that rehab process and you can run for an hour without pain,
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
mean that you can just walk away from doing all of the exercises associated with that.
Exactly. Yeah. And as I say, one of the first things I cover in the first session, here, again, using tendons injuries a lot just because of their obvious link to the triathlon world. But to heal a tendon fully, it takes 4 months.
Hmm.
So what this kind of link, that exact explanation you're going, let's say, interestingly, we can get rid of, because as I said earlier in the podcast, 95% of that tendon is still really healthy. It's just the
Hmm.
5% that isn't. Is that you can get to the point where you get people back training really quite high intensity and really quite well early compared to how long it takes for that tendon to heal, which is brilliant. It shows you how adaptable the human body is. But that doesn't mean that area is healed. It's the same that I often use a cut on your arm as an analogy. Yeah, it's scabbed up pretty quickly. It stopped bleeding, but that doesn't mean that cut's healed. It's
Yeah.
just the body is really good at kind of parking something,
Yes.
and so evolutionary we can keep exercising, keep in that world hunting, etc.,
Yeah.
sort of thing, but to keep us going. It doesn't necessarily mean that's completely done, healed, and
Mhm.
ticked off the box. It's just kind of go, well, you don't have to worry about it because you don't have the bandwidth to.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people they will on the talking about rehab and strength training, some people get to kind of February, March, and they've read about strength training, they get down the gym, and they'll be lifting weights once or twice a week, and they get to about February and they go, right, I've finished my strength training. I'm going to focus on my
Yeah.
swimming, my cycling, my running instead, and they drop the strength training. But I think it would be quite nuts if somebody said, you know what, my swimming's in a pretty good place. I'm just going to focus on my running and my cycling.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Well, again, as you
without
say, yeah,
maintaining the strengthening in those areas, in the same as if you weren't
yeah,
maintaining your swimming, you are going to see a degradation
yeah,
in the performance, and you are going to be more likely to have that injury pop up. And like we keep
absolutely,
saying, you are going to end up with a slow performance as a result.
absolutely.
So one of the last questions I had were, what do you feel are the biggest misconceptions that are flying around about injury in triathlon, or just sporting
Well,
injuries in general?
that's a big one. Biggest misconceptions.
I mean,
Probably the one I'd
to
say,
get you started, one that
yeah,
I come across a
you
lot,
go.
more from runners, is about, oh, you've got an injury, rest it for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
The idea
yeah,
that by resting you, that is going to, that the injury could then disappear sort of over time.
yeah. So good is a good example. And as I say, it's from what we were covering earlier, it's that idea of if you rest it, again, rest doesn't actually adapt anything. It's rest, as I say, the only recovery we get as humans is sleep. Resting it simply doesn't put as much load on. So the idea of the deep, you could probably more accurately call it an element of deload.
Hmm.
But if you are deloading something that's injured, you then need to reload it.
Mm,
So it's, and quite often, as you say, a much more efficient way to do it is instead of deloading it, just load it, as it were, sort of
mm,
thing. It is that you may well take out that 2 weeks of not doing anything can actually do something that's beneficial for it.
mm,
And it's that kind of crossover that you see happening, as you say, a lot with that kind of I'll rest it and it'll go, I'll be fine, sort of thing. And it's annoyingly, especially if you're using that three-phase kind of pattern that you're
mm.
describing, those kind of patterns, you shouldn't ever get to the point where that is even a logical thing to do, sort of thing. If it's at the point where you're thinking, I have to deload the running to the point where it's that painful, you go, well, then let's actually look at the physiology and respond to the physiology
Mm.
effectively rather than anything else. The other one I thought of recently, and again, this is this idea of conception, is that um, individuals, for example, injuries in, let's say, cycling or running, swimming, is that it's because you're running wrong that is causing the injury. So one of the big things, again, looking back into this idea of conditioning and exposure, um, you look at, let's say, if I took Luke Kipchoge's anatomy versus my anatomy versus your anatomy,
Mm.
is all of us would have completely different shape foots, this,
Mhm.
that, and the other. So this ability to sit there and go, if someone comes in and goes, "Oh, you've got this injury in this part of your foot because you're running wrong," well, that is a gross oversimplification, a complete massive oversimplification of an injury. Because likelihood your body's been doing that, and again, everyone a buzzy one at the moment is overpronation at the ankle. Is a very classic one. Um, is a good example as they sit there and go, "Oh, overpronation is terrible for you," this, that, and the other, and you go, "Well, you look at any top elite marathon runner, they overpronate massively,
Yeah, like
massive
35 kilometers
overpronation."
into the marathon, you look at their run form,
Yeah,
and it's all over the shot, as you'd expect them to be when
yeah,
they
it's,
are sort of 7/8 into an absolute max
yeah.
effort.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as you say, this we talk about this idea of technique breakdown, as we said earlier, is that if you prepare for technique breakdown, then that as that technique inevitably breaks down, all the research says it kind of has to happen. You're working
Yeah,
at max
yeah.
capacity. Show me one person at the end of right through the elites from anyone that doesn't. Is that if you then pre-prepare as you get to the point where, let's say, that tibialis posterior tendon in that example of overpronation, is
Mm,
if you've strengthened condition that prior to that technique breakdown, guess what? That tendon's conditioned and doesn't get an injury.
mm.
Then you go, oh, it's all about that idea of preparation is the biggest
Yep.
thing. So that's probably the biggest misconception I would say is that ability people to oversimplify and go, X is wrong with that, and
Mm,
then putting all your injuries down to that one thing that's wrong. Whereas
yep.
actually the human body is much more complicated. Your ability to sit there and go, you've got your own individual anatomy, sleep patterns, stresses,
Hmm.
exposures. That is that multifactor environment is what creates injuries, not
Yeah.
oversimplification.
If somebody comes to me for advice with running technique, what I'll generally do is I'll talk about, okay, so we need to make sure that our foot hits the ground when it is underneath our body rather than having that big overstride.
Yeah,
We need to make sure that we are standing tall, shoulders back, looking forward. We need to make sure that that we have a decent amount of movement in our arms, and we can chat about stride length and cadence.
yeah,
But
so
beyond
many different things.
that, I just generally stick to those basics.
Yeah,
Because if you start messing around with how somebody runs, there's a
yeah,
pretty high chance that you're going to upset something. Because as we said, the body likes that repeatability. The tendons like to be working in the way that they used to work. Um,
yeah,
and it's a really good way. I've had people come to me in the past and said, "Oh, yes, I had a coach look at my running and I changed this, and then I ended up injured." The body is very good at adapting to a stimulus, and broadly
yeah.
speaking, it will find the most efficient way to run.
It will do. It was, yeah.
If you look at some of like the very top Ironman athletes, some of them they run really horribly, but they're running really horribly at 3:30 per kilometer.
Yeah. Bloody so they say you go, oh, it's mad, and you go, yeah, no. And I think there was actually a German study I brushed across the other day. I have to find it that concluded it's exactly that. It was that if they changed everyone's patterns and this, that, and the other, and they then looked back at, well, what's the most efficient, and they found around about 98% of the time, the natural stride length, etc., sort of thing, was the stride length that was actually most efficient for that person. And you go, huh.
Yeah,
So just doing it as we like is the thing that worked most efficiently anyway. You go,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
Again, there are some basics that you want some people to understand that they may not, if they are brand new
Yeah,
to running, that they may not
yeah,
quite understand. But by the time that
exactly.
somebody is
That's
able
the
to run like a
point.
30-minute 5K, their body is already starting to adapt to that. Because you will, just as a human, if you start doing this pattern, if you start running 3 or 4 times a week, you will learn what feels good.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
your nervous system is going to start to implement things without you even thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the benefit. It's so adapt, and that's as we said the whole way through this podcast is it is so adaptable. It's just give it time and recovery.
Yeah. So last bit, wanted to talk about sort of the role of a preventative screening. When it is that you would advise people get one done, and what physio might be looking at when they provide a screening.
Yeah, and as I said, I think we've kind of touched on it a fair bit already in the benefit, especially as I said, for about the swimming side of things, is that principally a screening and a physio screening, depending on the individual that's coming in to see me, is that principally, as we said before, people that haven't had probably very large volumes of exercise for in the past, let's say 5 years or
Yeah.
something like that, people that have been desk bound, people that have had lower volumes of conditioning,
Mm.
they are the people that I would suggest having a pre-movement screening. And the fact that, as you say, if it's the 18-year-old already doing loads of other different sports and activities, likelihood the adaptability, because they're already adapted to lots of different things, they'll
Yeah.
turn their hand to a different sport relatively well. They will just cruise through. There might be odd little specifics, like you said about the gym culture people, about shoulder mobility, just because
Mm.
swimming is such a nichely specific rotation at the shoulder. Um, but the people that really, really would gain a lot from pre-movement screening, certainly from a mobility and strength and tendon perspective for injury prevention and performance, would be the individuals that haven't had that a
Hmm.
level of adaptability. Even if you've were a previous swimmer and things like that, you go, well, actually, while you may know where to put your arm and how to put your arm there, does your body still have that range of movement necessary to get into that position without getting injured?
Yeah.
And that's the bit, the individual is that kind of person that's starting off for the first time again, even if you've previously been fit and healthy,
Yep.
or for the first time and you're coming cross sport. And that's a good, I'm probably again a good example of that. And Going from rowing to triathlon, it was a good old step in terms of type and variation of mobility. And probably even more interesting is because I had the fitness to be able to go for very long distance. So my cardiovascular fitness is good enough to, and my mentality is there.
Mm.
That's often even more of a risk than a person starting out for the first time. Is the act of, if you're going right, I've already got the mentality, or I'll just jump in the pool and go, oh, like a normal rowing session for me would have been, oh yeah, 15k, 20k on an erg,
Yeah.
comfy, take me about an hour and a half, hour and 40. Well, if I just jump in the pool, I can do an hour and 40. You go,
Yeah.
that would be possibly the most ludicrous thing for injury kind of volumes, as it were, because you go, oh, I'm fit, I can just go and do it. And you
Yeah.
go, annoyingly, that it's that sort of person knowing where those limitations are to then almost give yourself a bit of leeway, because I know
Mm.
that a lot of it, certainly in my mind, psychologically, when I go into train for something, I want to be on it hard, and if I'm not finding the limit of where I
Mm.
am, I can almost beat myself up about it.
Yep.
Is the act of going, I can sit here and go, right, actually, you're at the moment, the best thing for you to do is not to crack out hundreds of miles in the pool because you don't have X, Y, and Z. So actually work on that and you'll get quicker
Hmm.
automatically, rather than just smashing your head against the wall, essentially, would probably be my
Yes.
recommendation.
Yeah. No, definitely. Um, that is, yeah, that banging the head against the wall, that frustration is something that a lot of triathletes will encounter because they'll see themselves, they start off in the sport and they start increasing exponentially. Um, and then
Yeah.
they hit a plateau, they hit a block, something will come along that kind of throws them off. And it can be like working, how do I move past this? How do I move beyond this? So I
Yeah.
wanted to, before we go, bit of a game because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, and I will I
Yeah.
give mine. But 5 movements that you would, if somebody could say, I can only do 5 exercises in the gym, okay, which 5 would
Yeah.
you choose? And I've got the 5 here, and we can debate them and see how much you agree.
Yeah.
First one,
So
I'm gonna go
I'm
on.
going to go top from bottom to top. I'll go.
Okay, you want to go first?
Yeah. Okay, go on. You go first. Go on.
All right.
Go.
So again, they may well be different. First one I'm going to say is a overhead squat. For that mobility, for that alignment. And that's something,
Okay.
we consider how many people have issues with their back. That if you like a well executed overhead squat, even if you're just using a broom
Yeah.
handle,
Yeah.
for helping getting the ankles where they need to be, all of that alignment, it's
Yeah.
really hard. But like it is
Yeah.
such a powerful movement for helping people to be able to develop and maintain a lot of the mobility required in triathlon. Um,
Yeah.
Next one, I'm going to go for just a classic deadlift or variations of
Yeah.
something big that's really going to get those glutes fired up, get those hamstrings
Yeah.
working. The amount of time that we spend on the bike as triathletes, how quad dominant
Yeah.
we can be, where we are doing loads and loads of that work that we're not engaging as much of our glutes and our hamstrings
Yeah.
by just deadlifting or a hip thrust, perhaps a barbell thrust if somebody
Yeah.
has issues that prevents them from being able to deadlift.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's something I always include some kind of hip hinge exercise in every week of strength training that
Yeah.
I set somebody. Calf
Yes.
raise,
Agreed.
I tend to
Yeah.
favor the single leg elevated calf raise. So standing on
Yeah.
a plyo box, standing on somebody's stairs, and full range of movement, right down from dropping the heel down, right up to bringing their
Yeah.
calf up as high as it goes. Full range of
Yeah.
movement, both sides, and really like if there's really go pretty hard on those.
Yeah.
Really push
That's
what it is that you can achieve
key.
with the calf.
Yeah.
You seem to be making the right noises so far, which is encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's caveats that I'm going to get into in a
Oh
second,
yeah, oh
but
yeah. I
as I
expect
say,
nothing less.
I'm saying well, there are three I'd agree with certainly at the moment in terms of logic, definitely.
Yes. The other one that I go for, which is the one I'm least confident about, I think, would be the bent over row.
Yeah.
To be able to get those, 'cause something that a lot of people struggle with in the water is obviously the technique. is a real
Mm.
element of that, but also sometimes people just be able to like actually engage the strength and the power in their stroke from their
Yeah.
lats is
Yeah.
something that, it's something to have a really picturesque stroke, but if they've got no firepower coming from those
Exactly.
muscles, they can
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
themselves having this very glorious looking stroke swimming at 220 per 100. And they go, well, how is
Yeah.
it that I can get faster? And I go, well, you need to develop more strength, you need to develop more power in those
Yeah.
muscles. So it's a
Yeah.
combination of paddle work and also that basic movement in the gym, getting those moving again. And the last one I have is the box jump.
Okay.
Um,
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
sorry.
Yeah. It's like throwing in some plyos as well. Let's say in my head, I was going pure strength training, but it is.
The explosivity that you get from
Yeah.
those and again, there's different types of box jumps that you can do, but
Mm.
having that
Mm.
ability to be able to get that, and again, maybe not like true plyometrics where you're going straight off as soon as your foot hits the floor, you're
Yeah.
going for another rep, because those can be like really
Yeah.
demanding. But even if it's just a low
Yeah.
box and somebody's taking plenty of recovery, to try to develop that, because we do a lot of like long, slow, easy training, a lot of strength
Yeah.
work, not strength work, aerobic fitness when we're training for triathlon, but the ability to be able to like to put in those hard intervals, to put in that hard work and increase that rate of force production, that is, yeah, it's something. It's great for developing all of the muscles in your quads again to have that explosivity to be able to hit those hard intervals when you're cycling and you're running.
Definitely. Definitely. It is. Because I hadn't thought about the kind of jumping and hopping side of things. It is.
I
So
suppose
it's
it's not really a
interesting. So
movement
I
in itself, is it? But
let's say it's a start. It's lots of different variations within that. Certainly, it is because say what I would the subtle caveats I'd throw in. So overhead squat, yeah, is probably one of my primaries. As well. It's actually one of the main things we use to assess everything. So it's one of those
yeah.
things that both an assessment technique and therefore probably the best strengthening exercise. I completely agree with
Yeah,
there. It's invaluable in that world, especially if you can do it with a barbell and the kind of center of mass aspect of the barbell as well is incredible.
yeah.
Um, Number two, deadlifting. I'd actually instead of a deadlift, I would go very much into a Romanian deadlift.
Okay,
So
yep,
obviously a variation into, as you say, you kind of went into kind of hip hinge movements afterwards.
yep.
So I was like, yeah, I would purely because when we look at the efficiency, again, if you're saying about it's very quad dominant, we want posterior chain dominance. Well,
Mm,
if we're doing and for people that are unfamiliar with the Romanian deadlift, we're essentially saying a straight leg deadlift. So instead of allowing to bend down, you're keeping much more of a, as I say, almost a bowing motion when you're
hmm.
deadlifting, rather than the kind of typical knee bend. Is it simply puts more like even more load on the hamstrings and the glutes. It's just
Hmm.
the same beneficial aspects of the deadlift. It is just amplifying the process of even more load on those areas that we're trying to place into, which is grand. So
I
same logic, but
I do like
just
a Romanian
maximizing.
deadlift, but my issue with Romanian deadlifts is that whenever I do them, I can't run for 3 days afterwards.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think it's in my
Just that bit.
hamstrings, my hamstring, and a lot of clients who I coach, they have a similar response. If I do sort of a standard deadlift or a stiff leg deadlift, then I can be back to
Yeah,
running, without issue sort of relatively soon. But you include the remain, and obviously that comes down to the individual. I definitely don't disagree
yeah,
with that, but I
yeah.
find because
It is.
The Romanian
It,
puts a bit more load on the hamstring, as you were saying.
Yeah, yeah, and it's that idea. It's probably the difference between performance and injury prevention. Because again, if you were
Mm,
to, what I often say to people with that kind of DOMS base, that kind of ache and the inhibition to the training afterwards, DOMS, as it delayed onset muscle soreness, we're
yeah.
aware of, because of its injury. And I think again we covered this last time we chatted a little bit, but because it's actually a massively nervous system based reaction, it's not
Yep.
just muscular, is
Yes.
that individuals that if you're having this real volume of soreness after that movement
Mm,
for the first 2 3 times you've done it, most of that soreness will be nervous system based.
mm.
It is alteration of your synaptic involved, and I'll go into that at a different time. So if you were to do it for 2 to 3 weeks, that soreness you experience through that movement
Yes.
wouldn't then reoccur. So it's that idea of the once you're adapted, yes, it is a harder one to adapt to than a deadlift,
Mm,
certainly. But once you're adapted, it's that much more effective.
hmm. Yep. No. Good
Heel
point.
raises, yeah, that was also my number one. So up there, heel raise, yeah, no brainer. I put that in pretty much every single high level. I'm a fan of the leg press based heel raise personally
Yeah.
because it's just a little bit more objective. You can put into a really high level of load with the two legs,
Yes.
and quite
Yeah.
often fit people feel a bit more stable being on two legs than one. But
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
triple load on the Achilles, whatever way whatever shape or form you want to, single leg, double legs, whatever, get some load through
I
the
mean, what
Achilles.
one
That's huge.
once I get clients up to doing like 25 reps on each leg for three
Yeah,
sets, then I
yeah,
go, okay, this is just becoming a slow form of torture. Let's add
yeah,
in a barbell so that we can
yeah.
continue
Get some
loading
strength.
it in a different way.
Completely agree. Spot on. From there, row. I would probably do because I love the logic in it, but I would
Mm.
actually probably do a cable lat pull through. So an
Oh yeah, yeah,
overhead
yeah,
cable pull through. So in the fact that it's the exact same idea of building lat and exposure, strength and exposure through the lat, but
yep,
there's a much more cross correlative exposure to the movement. And again, for those that are unfamiliar, cable pull through is essentially bar above your head on the cable machine, and you with straight arms, kind of almost in the kind of 11s is position you'd be in your swimming
yep,
position. You then pull that bar with a kind of slightly bent arms down almost to your kind of hip to your belt level in a kind of an arc, very similar to that of the pull that you're going to be doing in swimming. And the idea is to go, right, let's fire those lats up there. If we can fire it there, not only it does the strength, but also the kind of proprioception of feeling your lats when
yeah,
you're under
yeah.
high load, when
That's
you're
that's a
then
fantastic
going
point,
into
actually. Yeah.
swimming environment. So I really, that is again, it's a core in my swim training, is really big for that kind of lat pull
Mm.
throughs. And then finally, I'd only, just because of what we said earlier about running being possibly the more injured environment,
Mm.
is instead of plyometrics, I'd probably do like a single leg cable abduction for the
Mm-hmm.
hip,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the focal aspect of the likelihood of injury. It's a little bit less
Yeah,
performance orientated because again,
yeah,
I definitely see the jumping the anything box jump from the performance side of things,
yeah.
but just from the physio perspective, I'd probably be saying more. Can we throw in something that is a cable
Something's going to hit the glute
reduction or a,
medius. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
something that's gonna, yeah, seated abductions, cable abduction, banded, an
yeah.
element of banded
No,
abduction, lift for an activation. That's
I
probably the
agree.
only thing I would change.
Yeah. No, I agree actually. I realised I haven't actually included anything lateral there. So that would be yeah, that I'd swap I'd swap the box jump probably for the yeah, something that's gonna hit the glute med there. But no, glad to see that they're both singing from the same hymn sheet there.
Yeah, it's
So
same game.
um so to wrap things up, we've got so you're based in Cirencester,
Yeah,
which is so it's pretty easy accessible from the M5 and the M4, I'd say.
yeah,
Um, so anyone who's sort of down in sort of the southwest, West Midlands, or living on the M4, the M5 corridor, if they're looking for a physio who is an Ironman competitor themselves, who understands the sport, someone who wants to keep someone running, how is it they can book an appointment with you?
yeah. So there's two main ways. So you can either go, as I say, the company and my practice is called Cirencester Physiotherapy Centre. So it's an easily Googleable name. If you go Cirencester Physio,
Yeah,
it will just come straight up. You can look on our website. We have an online booking platform, so you can either book through there. It's fully kind of customizable, and get into the point where you can just click on there and you'll have both my diary as well as my other two physios that work alongside me, also very much into the strength.
yeah,
My name is George, so if you say if it's very specific to the triathlon world, I'd recommend coming in and booking it himself. If not, then we used to have a receptionist that is working 6 days a week, so always takes phone calls. And our contact number is 01285 238 240. If you give that number a call, her name is Tracy. She's lovely. She's like an auntie, essentially. She will book you if you say, "Oh, I've said for this, that, and the other," and be it say quoting Simon or myself or this podcast.
Yeah.
What I often do for individuals that are coming from that triathlon world is give a half price appointment for the first assessment, just to make it a little bit more accessible, especially if you're traveling from
Yeah.
a little bit further. And if you ask Tracy, if you go on there and just ask her specifically
Yep.
and quote that, she'll be saying, "Yeah, cool, I'll pop one in for you." And that's the best two ways. I'm very much, I still like the old talk to people way, while the online stuff is there.
Yeah.
The best way generally is have a chat and we can sort you out.
Cool, lovely. And if I pop your email down the show notes, if somebody does want to sort of contact you via email, if they've got any sort of quick
More than
questions,
happy.
yeah.
Yeah, more than happy. It's as I say, any, even if it is on our mobile as well. Our mobile number is 0747 442 103. If anyone wanted to drop me a text or anything like that, or a WhatsApp on there, more than happy to have a conversation with people over the old WhatsApp.
Excellent. George, it's been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed
Pleasure.
it. I hope that the listeners have too. And what we'll do is, I know I sort of talked about this via email, but if we get you back on sort of once a quarter or so, and we can do a bit more
Yeah.
of a deep dive into specific areas, injuries, have an episode chatting about the spine or chatting about lower limb injuries, stuff like that, so that to sort of really help people understand the logic behind that. I think that people find that really useful.
Yeah, and then if any listeners want to comment on certain types of injuries or the common things that they see, and so we can probably have a little pick out of whatever comes up at the bottom,
Oh
find the
yeah,
most
yeah.
popular.
So if you're listening to this on Spotify and you want us to cover an injury, a specific injury, drop it down in the comments on Spotify. If you're not listening to it on Spotify, if you listen to Apple or anywhere else, drop me an email, Simon at Phazon Triathlon, and I'll look at all the votes and add up all of that, and we can then use that to influence what it is that we have a look at next time.
Sounds good. Sounds excellent.
All right, it's been a pleasure, George. Thank you very
Pleasure,
much,
sir.
and I'm wishing you the very best with the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.
Cheers. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to George for giving up so much of his time and his knowledge for free to share it with everyone. I really hope that you found that useful, you found that interesting. If you have enjoyed this discussion, if you thought, you know what, these two, like, they really sound like they know what they're talking about, and I trust them to be able to keep me injury free. Okay, you can work with me as a coach and you can work with George as a physio on a remote basis, and we can help you achieve your triathlon goals together. So drop me an email, simon@phazontriathlon.com, or if you're just interested in the physio side of things, drop George a WhatsApp or give the practice app a call. Again, as I said at the end of last week's episode, he is starting to do more in the way of remote consultations to work with some of my athletes who are overseas. So he will be able to give you a program that will keep you training without just slamming on the anchors, and is going to give you the right kind of exercises that you need to help recover from that injury in good time. But before we go, I'm going to break that all down into sort of more accessible language for everyone who may have got a little bit lost there. So most injuries are caused when you push the body outside of its limits and what it is that it is used to. Those who are just starting a triathlon journey, those who are starting from very little background in one of the three sports, these are the group who are most at risk of injury. Which is why it is very highly recommended to go to physiotherapists to get a movement screening, especially if you are in your 30s, 40s or older, to find out how it is that you work, to understand what kind of exercises it is that we need to be doing in your triathlon training to help prevent reduce the risk of injury. There, you can never absolutely prevent all injuries. All we can really do is reduce the risk. Once you go in and see a physio, then they will be able to give you an assessment, try and work out where they are, try and understand what it is that's caused the injury, and hopefully they'll be educating you, helping you understand exactly what it is that's going on, because education, real understanding, is a major part of this. Something we didn't touch on in the episode though is that just because you see a physio doesn't mean that it's all the injury is going to take care of itself. Okay, you need to do the exercises. You need to go back, with some regularity to the physio. Again, George talked about the regularity with which he sees his patients. Each physio, works differently, and if you are on an absolute shoestring of a budget, you may only be able to go in for one session, but get some exercises to be getting on with. But the tendon injuries should be, say, in about 4 months, they should be able to sort of be healed fully. And in many cases, within 2 to 3 weeks, we should really be getting back up to speed with our running in most cases. But there are always exceptions to these rules that take into account the type of tendon, age, training age, all of these factors here. So I don't want somebody to think, oh, if I see a physio, I'll be absolutely symptom free in 4 months. It's not always that easy, unfortunately. The most common injuries that you tend to see in triathletes are around sort of the hip and the feet, so sort of Achilles tendon, as well as various hip issues that people can suffer with. And it's about strengthening these muscles surrounding these joints to allow them to absorb the load, increasing the training in a sensible fashion, working with a coach or following a training plan to make sure that you are sort of giving yourself every chance that you can to avoid picking any of these up. But again, as I said, there's never any guarantees. On the bike, it's often neck pain and lower back pain from people riding with either a poor position on the bike, or they're putting in unsuitable levels of volume for the sort of how comfortable and well set up they are on their aero bars. They may go from doing 4-hour rides on their road bike to 4-hour rides on their TT bike and really pick up some issues around their neck. So that's something you need to be careful with. And in the swim, naturally, it's mainly going to be shoulder injuries that people suffer with. And we also make the point of the importance of the mobility in the shoulder joint of actually be able to help set you up for a good catch. So, arm position in the water. So that if you are someone who's really struggling with their swimming, then actually by spending a lot of time on shoulder mobility, this might really help you get your arms where it needs to be and to be able to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. And that broadly is just about it. I'm well happy about the fact that when we played that little sort of game at the end, that I managed to get 4 out of the 5 exercises sort of correct, as it were. If I'm agreeing with the physio on those kinds of things, then that suggests that the strength plans that I am writing, are doing the job they need to. And rest assured that I already have lots of lateral movement in my strength plans. And I don't need to go back and edit all of those. That the sessions that I've been setting, seems to do the job. Now, as mentioned at the end of the episode there, I will be getting George on with some regularity. We're going to be chatting about different areas of the human body, different injuries. We really will go into the weeds a little bit more. If you want us to talk about the Achilles tendon for 90 minutes non-stop, we will give the people what they want. So if you want to send me an email at simon@phasontriathlon.com, where I will then be able to sort of tally up those requests and find out what the most requested topic is. Alternatively, if you're on Spotify, there should be a poll that will have opened shortly after this episode went live, where you'll be able to vote on some of the most common injuries and issues and things that people might want to understand more about. If you would like to sort of see more of these episodes, if you really enjoyed it, if you found it useful, please take the time to give me a nice 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. It really does make a big difference and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your company. I hope you found it useful and I'll see you all next Tuesday morning.